No one believed this Marine tail gunner would become TV's most beloved uncle until he proved every last one of them wrong. What if I told you that the man who became America's favorite television uncle, the guy who made millions of families laugh every Thursday night for 5 straight years, once sat in the rear cockpit of a dive bomber, firing twin machine guns at Japanese Zeros while his plane screamed toward the Earth at angles steeper than 90 degrees? What if I told you he was born in a dresser drawer backstage at a traveling theater company, that his stepmother jumped to her death from the Hollywood sign, that he was rejected from the Merchant Marine because he couldn't pass Algebra, and that this supposed failure redirected him into one of the most quietly extraordinary careers in Hollywood history? Yeah, what if I told you this man appeared in over 100 films, starred in 9 television series, worked with Brando and McQueen and Connery, and never once won an Emmy, never received an Oscar nomination, and by his own admission, never gave a hoot? And what if I told you that his life ended in the most devastating way imaginable? A father who could not survive the loss of his daughter, choosing to follow her into whatever comes next? Well, you'd better sit down for this one, because the life of Brian Keith is one of the most extraordinary, most heartbreaking, and most unjustly forgotten stories that old Hollywood ever produced. And it starts in the last place you'd expect. Here are 10 things you never knew about Brian Keith. Number 1. The boy who slept in a dresser drawer. Robert Alba Keith entered this world on November 14th, 1921, in Bayonne, New Jersey. And he didn't arrive in a hospital bed. He arrived backstage. His father, Robert Keith, was a veteran stage actor touring with John Golden's road company. His mother, Helena Shipman, was a stage actress and radio performer from Aberdeen, Washington. Both parents were working actors, which meant that infant Brian spent his first years not in a nursery, but in hotel rooms and backstage dressing rooms across the eastern seaboard. His mother later recalled the arrangement that kept her career alive. She would tuck baby Brian into an open dresser drawer in her dressing room, where he would sleep through entire performances. The audience never knew that a future Hollywood star was dozing 20 feet behind the curtain. By age 2, Brian was already on camera. He appeared in the 1924 silent film Pied Piper Malone alongside his father, a Paramount production directed by Alfred E. Green, starring Thomas Macon. He appeared in a second film that same year. Most sources say he was 3. The records say he was 2. He later recalled the experience without any fondness whatsoever. He said, and I quote, "I didn't like it. No youngster wanted to be an actor then. You wanted to be a cowboy or a fireman." But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. His parents divorced around 1925. Robert Keith moved to Hollywood. Brian was raised by his mother and maternal grandmother in East Rockaway, New York. The same community, by the way, that would later produce Telly Savalas. And his father, Robert Keith, married a Broadway actress named Peg Entwistle. In 1932, Peg Entwistle climbed to the top of the Hollywoodland sign in the hills above Los Angeles and jumped to her death from the letter H. It remains one of the most infamous suicides in Hollywood history. Suicide haunting the Keith family. Decades before it would claim Brian himself. Nobody saw that coming, but the pattern was already being written. Number 2, the tail gunner who fired flares at Japanese Zeros. In the summer of 1941, months before Pearl Harbor, 19-year-old Brian Keith walked into a recruiting office and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. His motivation was pure boyhood romanticism. He said, "When I was 9 or 10, during the early Great Depression years, I sold Liberty magazines. I used to enjoy reading stories of Marines at Belleau Wood and in China. I longed to play a part in those exotic adventures." He got his wish, and it nearly killed him. After boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, Keith fired expert on both rifle and pistol ranges and was selected as a marksmanship instructor at Officers Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia. But Keith didn't want to teach. He wanted to fight. He was assigned to Marine Scout Bombing Squadron VMSB 244 as a radio man and tail gunner in the rear cockpit of a Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber. His weapons were twin-mounted 30 caliber Browning machine guns. His job was to shoot down Japanese Zeros attacking from behind, while his pilot dove vertically from 10 to 15,000 feet to release bombs on enemy positions. Let me say that again. Vertically. Sometimes at angles steeper than 90 degrees. The Keith flew missions from Bougainville in the Solomon Islands to Rabaul, a heavily fortified Japanese base on New Britain, through a corridor the Marines called the Valley of Death. He spent approximately 2 years in sustained combat as a tail gunner. His aircraft was hit repeatedly. One burst tore a 3-foot hole in the wing. Another shot his earphones clean off his head, and in one desperate engagement, with his gun overheated and 2 Zeros still coming, Keith did something nobody teaches you in training. He grabbed his signal flare gun and started firing double red flares directly at the incoming enemy aircraft. He kept firing until a Navy pilot arrived and shot one of them down. The man fired flares at fighter planes. That's not courage. That's something beyond courage. His squadron flew with air cover that included Major Gregory Pappy Boyington's famous Black Sheep Squadron, which, as Keith put it, flew cover for us every other day. On the ground at Bougainville, Japanese guerrillas attacked from jungle hideouts. Keith told a story of a card game interrupted when he spotted Japanese soldiers approaching their tent. His buddies didn't believe him until bullet holes appeared through the tent wall. Keith was awarded the AIR Medal, signed personally by Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal and Admiral Bull Halsey, along with Combat Aircrew Insignia, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 3 battle stars, and the World War II Victory Medal. And the day after VJ Day, he punched a sailor in a Miami nightclub who flew across the room past a group of Navy officers. And given a choice between 90 days in the brig or reduction in rank, he chose the demotion. He said, "I was getting out of the Corps anyway. That's a Marine for you." Number 3. The algebra failure that made him a star. Here's the fork in the road that nobody talks about. After the war, Brian Keith did not plan to become an actor. He tried to obtain a commission in the Merchant Marine, a completely different career path that would have taken him to sea permanently. He was rejected. The reason? He couldn't pass Algebra. "You can't be a ship's officer without passing a few math courses," he said, "and I came up with a big fat 0 in algebra." So the man who had survived 2 years of combat over the Pacific, who had fired flares at Japanese fighter planes, one who had earned an air medal signed by Bull Halsey, was turned away because of mathematics. He used the GI Bill to take acting courses instead. He moved back to New York, and in 1948, he made his Broadway debut in the ensemble of Mr. Roberts, the same production in which his father, Robert Keith, starred as Doc Father and Son, sharing a Broadway stage. Brian was still billed as Robert Keith Jr. He spent 7 years in New York theater, summer stock, and early live television before Paramount Pictures signed him as a contract player in 1953. His first major feature was Arrowhead, a Western with Charlton Heston and Jack Palance. And just like that, a failed math test had turned a would-be merchant sailor into a Hollywood leading man. Number 4. The director he launched and the masterpiece he lost. Throughout the 1950s, Keith was trapped. The studio saw a big, handsome, square-jawed man and gave him what critics called secondary assignments in genre pictures as either he-men or villains. He worked opposite Glenn Ford, Barbara Stanwyck, Ginger Rogers, Kim Novak, and Bette Davis, but always in the supporting role. He played Paul Newman's father in The Young Philadelphians, despite being only 4 years older than Newman. Then came Sam Peckinpah. In 1960, Keith starred in Peckinpah's groundbreaking TV western The Westerner on NBC, just 13 episodes, but later recognized as a masterpiece of gritty, realistic television. Keith played Dave Blassingame, an illiterate drifter, alongside a dog who had starred in Old Yeller. When CBS executives suggested toning down the show for children, Keith told them, and this is a direct quote, to go fly a kite. The show was canceled, but Peckinpah himself later credited Keith with something far more important. He said, "It was Brian Keith who got me my first movie directing break." That break was The Deadly Companions in 1961. Peckinpah's directorial debut, with Keith starring opposite Maureen O'Hara. And that film launched one of the most influential directing careers in cinema history. Without Brian Keith, there is no Wild Bunch, there is no Straw Dogs, there is no Sam Peckinpah as we know him. And here's the cruel irony. When Peckinpah was casting The Wild Bunch in 1969, now considered one of the greatest westerns ever made, he offered Keith the role of Deke Thornton. Keith had to turn it down, because he was locked into a contract for a family sitcom. Number 5. The Disney discovery that changed everything. What nobody expected, least of all Brian Keith himself, was that Walt Disney would see something the Tough Guy Studios had completely missed. After a modest start with 10 Who Dared in 1960, Disney cast Keith as Mitch Evers in The Parent Trap. In 1961, the charming, rugged California rancher and father of Haley Mills's twin characters. The film earned over $25 million domestically, and Keith's performance revealed a warmth and comedic timing that audiences had never seen from him before. One reviewer noted his right mixture of roughneck toughness and paternal warmth. Keith himself said, "I like it so much, I forgot I was in it." He became a Disney regular, appearing in at least 7 Disney productions through the mid-1960s. And that Parent Trap warmth, the gruff but gentle single father, became the template for the role that would define his entire career. His posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, awarded in 2008, was placed directly next to Walt Disney's. Even in death, the connection held. Number 6. Uncle Bill and the show that made 29 million families tune in. In 1966, producer Don Fedderson, who had already pioneered the single-parent sitcom with My Three Sons, cast Keith as Uncle Bill Davis in Family Affair on CBS. The show followed a wealthy bachelor engineer living in a luxury Fifth Avenue apartment whose life is upended when his brother's 3 orphaned children come to live with him. Keith was paired with the legendary Sebastian Cabot as his gentleman's gentleman, Mr. French, and 3 child actors who became overnight sensations: Anissa Jones as Buffy, Johnny Whittaker as Jody, and Kathy Garver as Sissy. Keith personally recruited 6-year-old Johnny Whittaker for the role. He would knock on the boy's hotel room door and ask his mother if he could come out to play. The show was a phenomenon. At its peak, in the 1967 through 68 season, Family Affair reached number 4 in the Nielsen ratings. With 29 million households tuning in every week, it ranked in the top 20 for 4 of its 5 seasons. It ran for 138 episodes. Keith received 3 consecutive Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. He never won a single one. A unique production arrangement made the show work for Keith's film career. Like Fred McMurray on My Three Sons, all of Keith's scenes were filmed in just 2 30-day blocks per season, roughly 3 months total, freeing him for films and personal time the remaining 9 months. Keith expressed genuine affection for the show. He said, "This is the type of show I love because it reminds me of what happiness I have with my wife and our children." He also called it, and you have to appreciate the honesty here, a tugboat with $signs attached. Co-star Kathy Garver captured the man perfectly. She said, "Brian would come in and say, 'Oh, what do we have today? Let me see the scene. Let's go.' No preparation, no method acting. Just pure, natural talent every single take." Number 7. The Russian-speaking Marine who played 2 presidents. Here's something that would shock anyone who only knew Brian Keith as Uncle Bill. The man spoke fluent Russian. This led to his casting as a Soviet scientist in Meteor in 1979, opposite Natalie Wood, who was also a Russian speaker, and as the Soviet General Secretary in the miniseries World War III in 1982, opposite Rock Hudson. And here's the irony that nobody caught at the time. In The Russians Are Coming, the Russians are coming. The 1966 Cold War comedy that earned a Best Picture Oscar nomination. Keith played an American who needed Russian translated for him, the fluent Russian speaker, playing a man who couldn't understand Russian. Hollywood. but it was his work with director John Milius that produced Keith's most underrated performances. In The Wind and the Lion in 1975, Keith played President Theodore Roosevelt opposite Sean Connery, a performance widely considered the best portrayal of Roosevelt in film history. Variety called it marvelous, praising Keith for capturing the president's energy and charisma. And in his final major role, barely able to stand, ravaged by chemotherapy, Keith played President William McKinley in Milius's Rough Riders in 1997. That made him one of the rare actors to play two different United States presidents for the same director. Milius dedicated the entire film to him. The dedication read, "Brian Keith, actor, Marine, raconteur." Number 8. The private man behind the public face. Off-screen, Brian Keith was a man of deep contradictions. The tough guy actor was a voracious reader who said, "If I live to be 100, and I hope I do, I won't have time to read all the books I want to read." He was an avid woodworker who crafted his own furniture, a skilled cook, a painter, a sailor who owned a 41-foot yacht called Maialoha off Waikiki, an animal lover who rescued strays. He owned a 200-acre ranch in Redlands, California. Keith married 3 times. His first marriage to actress Frances Helm lasted from 1948 to 1954. His second, to actress and dancer Judith Landon, from 1954 to 1969, produced 2 biological children and 3 adopted children. His son Michael died of pneumonia at age 8 in 1963, a devastating blow that Keith rarely discussed publicly. His third marriage, to Victoria Young, on January 9, 1970, was his longest and happiest. Victoria was a Hawaiian-born actress, nearly 23 years his junior. They had 2 children, daughter Daisy Lealoha Keith and son Robert. Kathy Garver captured the paradox better than anyone. She said, "A very warm and sensitive man. At the same token, being a very macho guy. It was a great combo. He was a lifelong Republican, a Roman Catholic, a man who valued privacy above everything, and he was a heavy smoker, a Camel cigarette spokesman in the 1950s who didn't quit until 1986. A decade later, the damage was done." Number 9. The curse that followed family affair into the grave. In early 1997, 75-year-old Brian Keith was diagnosed with emphysema and terminal lung cancer. He began brutal chemotherapy that ravaged him physically and emotionally. But the cancer was not what destroyed him. On April 16, 1997, his 27-year-old daughter, Daisy Keith, the little girl he had named with a Hawaiian middle name, Lealoha, took her own life at her Hollywood apartment. She died the following day at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She left no note. Daisy had been married to musician Scott Sampson. She had appeared as an actress alongside her father in the 1989 series Heartland. She was 27 years old. The loss shattered Brian Keith. He was already dying. Now he was dying without his daughter. And the tragedy compounded what has been called the family affair curse. Co-star Anissa Jones, Little Buffy, died in 1976 at 18 from one of the most severe drug overdoses ever recorded by the Los Angeles County Coroner. Sebastian Cabot died of a stroke in 1977 at 59. Johnny Whitaker battled drug and alcohol addiction for 9 years before achieving sobriety. Even Anissa's brother Paul died of a drug overdose. The teenager who hosted the party where Anissa died was killed in a car crash in Hawaii in 1996. Kathy Garver, the lone survivor, rejects the curse narrative. She says, "I don't think there's any curse, coincidences or different lifestyles, but for the families who lived through it, coincidence is a cold word." Number 10. The note he left behind. On the morning of June 24th, 1997, 10 weeks after Daisy's death, family members found Brian Keith at his home on Malibu Colony Road in Malibu. He was gone. Unlike his daughter, Keith left a handwritten note. It read, "The end is here. I'm finished. The pain is too much. Now it's time for me to join our little Daisy. She needs me. She didn't want to be without me here, so she'll have me again over there. Don't be sad." This had to come soon. Before his death, Keith had called Family Affair co-stars Kathy Garver and Johnny Whitaker to say goodbye. Pop culture historian Jeffrey Mark explained, he called them to say goodbye and let them know what he was about to do. He didn't want them to read it in the paper or hear about it on television. Whitaker had spoken with Keith just 5 days before. He said he was not feeling well because he had been going through the chemotherapy for his cancer. Garver offered perhaps the most perceptive reading of all. She said, knowing Brian, who has been so independent all his life and always wanted to do things the way he wanted to do, that could have meant beating the Grim Reaper before the Reaper got him. Jeffrey Mark added, this was not a madman having a bad moment. This was somebody who felt that his time on the planet was over, that he could not deal with the physical pain of the cancer or the emotional pain of his daughter's suicide. Keith's ashes were interred at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, directly above those of his daughter Daisy. He was 75 years old. So let's take one final look at the extraordinary life of Brian Keith. Born backstage to 2 actors in 1921 and tucked into a dresser drawer to sleep. On camera by age 2. Parents divorced by age 4. Stepmother jumped from the Hollywood sign when he was 10. Enlisted in the Marines at 19. Flew as a tail gunner over the Pacific for 2 years, firing signal flares at Japanese Zeros when his guns overheated. And earned an Air Medal signed by Bull Halsey. Rejected from the Merchant Marine because of Algebra. Used the GI Bill to become an actor. Shared a Broadway stage with his father. Signed by Paramount. Launched Sam Peckinpah's directing career. Cast by Walt Disney. Became Uncle Bill to 29 million American households. Spoke fluent Russian. Played Theodore Roosevelt. Starred in over 100 films and 9 television series. Lost his 8-year-old son to pneumonia. Lost his 27-year-old daughter to suicide. And 10 weeks later, dying of lung cancer and broken beyond repair, left a note that said, "Now it's time for me to join our little Daisy." At the start of this video, I told you that nobody believed a Marine tail gunner from a backstage dresser drawer would become television's most beloved uncle. But Brian Keith didn't need anyone to believe in him. He never made what he called a career move. He never looked for stepping stones to stardom. He never gave a hoot about fame. He just showed up. He did the work. He gave you everything he had, every single take. And when the pain became more than any man should have to carry, he did what Marines do. He made his own decision, on his own terms. Actor, Marine, raconteur, Brian Keith, 1921 to 1997. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next, because we are just getting started.